So my intent is to share a enjoyable educational experience with you on birds. And so how many of you would rate yourself as a beginning bird watcher? Hey, that's a cool thing because my hand's staying up on that part, and I've been at it since age 5. There's always something new to learn, isn't there? All right, so feel free to ask questions as we go along. They're limiting me on time, which is a good thing for you because I can go on about birds, but I enjoy all of nature as well. So we'll get started then. Oh, I like pop quizzes. Do you? Do you remember in college, I remember my first year shooting a lot of hoops across the parking lot, and then I come in my American history class, and here was this professor that says, "Oh, and we're having a pop quiz." Didn't even tell us. Oh boy, and that's 30% of your grade. So good time to leave if you don't like pop quizzes. All right, we'll get started here. So it's only been relatively recent that began as Bert Weber, a professor at Western, maybe you know, started thinking, well, the indigenous peoples of this area, speaking their Salician trade language, about 14 different groups, we're pretty much working in the watershed of this ocean, right, which includes the mountains as well around us into this basin that we all love to boat on and live in. So if you're not familiar with this, you can go online and find it as well. Do you recognize most of the parts of this map here? Can everyone hear me in the back? Yeah. And you can see me? Okay, good enough. But if we haven't felt an earthquake recently, we're long overdue, as you know. How much you paying a month for mortgage? We're not really ready if you know this, but I'll just go into the big stuff in terms of the subduction zone of earthquakes and creating mountains around us, okay? Which then in turn, here's a few plates that we might look at. And we finished a great dinner plate, but that's not up here, okay? So we're up in this zone right here. So we see several different plates. They're in conjunction with the American plate, and this is going to continue to go on. Maybe you're not into plate tectonics, but you should be. Yeah. And when you think about the islands that we're all in love with out here, that really these are terrains. These are mini plates that have floated in here. How many of you know, here's another pop quiz for you, I'll tell you the answer, all right, it's easy, that all of Alaska basically is aggregated terrains that have rafted up onto each other, that huge, massive state, and most of that material, if you follow current geology, is coming from the South Pacific. Even our Mount Herman up here at the ski area, South Pacific rock originally. So if you're like sailing and you like to go slow, I work sometimes on ships. I have the last 14 years up in Spitsbergen. Do you know where that is? This Svalbard area of Norway. And that island archipelago actually began its life, shall we say, down in Gondaland alongside of Antarctica. And if it's been cruising up, the mid-Atlantic ridge all this time, and guess what? It's still headed north. So I mention these things just as shapers of our local landforms, our geomorphology, and here's a little bit of an insight in terms of the age of some of the rocks. Some of this this work has been done some of the wonderful professors at Western. So an aerial view looking down this time of year with a little bit of snow at elevation, and if you're looking for marine birds, I'll just give you a hint. I wouldn't go over here to the Scablands, okay? It's not a good place. If you're into rare birds, well, you could park it there and maybe camp for months or years, and you might come up with a good one. Oh yeah, I know that bird from Western Washington. All right, I like to have fun. Are you enjoying your experience so far? You want me to do a cartwheel? Any questions thus far? I like to think outside the box as you get to know me, and so that might not be PC. I'll try and rein it in tonight, but if you want to pick my brain on the street sometime, I got some cards up here. I love to give talks, and we could go at it. So you'll recognize some of these areas, I'm sure. And so this interface, right, with this ocean, I could have worn my One Ocean shirt up here in Squamish, another company I work with. That's their contention is, our bodies and the ocean are basically the same, right? What, 71.5% aqueous. We have this beautiful saltwater interface with the land. Here's your first or second pop quiz. What's that interface between one habitat and the other? Ooh, that stunned them. That's called an ecotone. And what you and I enjoy here is the interface of the water and the land, and is also known as riparian habitat. It can be freshwater or saltwater. And given the extensive coastline that we have here in Washington around the Salician Sea, right, that we have a huge amount of that habitat. And guess what? I had a friend who was a master's student at Western, and don't scoop me, how many of you have applications for Survivor program where you can win $1 million? Some of you probably have an application in, right? What? The hardest part is collaborating with your fellow team members, is it not? But with this information, you could survive as far as food finding. With a sharp stick, a loosely woven basket that any of us, we didn't pass that class, but made out of cedar roots or spruce growing in sand. You don't want roots that grew in rocky soil because they're very crooked. Make yourself a little basket, your sharp stick, and a little time, and you can find more food quicker right here at the interface between the land and the water. Remember that. Might help you one day, huh? And this wasn't lost on indigenous peoples, okay?
Right.
And I've gone through a lot of the literature. I got exposed to indigenous ceremonies back when I was 8 years old in Michigan. And so I have a deep reverence for them because as naturalists, hey, they were living it 24/7 and still are. And you might see them using technology, but guess what? I think I would follow one of them to find a meal, not perhaps any of you. We'd all starve, right? So celebrating, in a reverent way, the amazing resources that are around here. Again, what a talented group of people. And here they were, along the cliff edges. And our people coming across the big pond from the Atlantic probably almost, eradicated a number of species by taking their eggs and eating them, right? Good tucker, some people would say. Good food. But again, I got ahead of myself, but here's that intertidal area. I teach classes on these at Western, and it's fun. There's an amazing array of organisms here. I'm putting this out there because if I was, and I just taught for North Cascades Automata class on recognizing avian behaviors, and of the 52 basic behaviors that you or I or a bird or a mammal might utilize, probably 26%, over half, are foraging behaviors. And I watched you. I learned some tricks tonight. There's some pretty good technique in this room, let me tell you. So here were these different groups going north of Canada and USA borders. So various groups that settled into this area. And I would say it's a cultural parallel with what happened down in the New Zealand archipelago area. There was people there, but they're denied, to actually even existed. Did you know that Caucasoid people came to North America well before? And you've heard of Kennewick Man, right? 9,000 some odd years ago. So up to 20,000 years ago, there was people that came into this country pre the modern day native persons, okay? Which is a whole nother topic. I won't go there, but it's an interesting one. So these people are maritime cultures harvesting, as I just said, those rich resources in their tidal and out on the ocean. Prior to that, we know that there were other peoples here following, from Asia, the Varangian Bridge, into the New World, North, Central, and South America, all those peoples. And if you look at the linguistics as well, it's pretty well known. But they were hunting, and I kayaked out to Smith Island. Do you know where that is? Off the south end of Lopez. Had some nice big rollers going out there. Got onto that intertidal beach, and we found 3, not 1, but 3 massive molars. I sent mine to UW, and they said, oh, that's a mammoth molar. But mammoth's teeth were always growing because they were feeding on grasses, etc., in sandy soils that would wear their teeth down. But actually what I found is a molar more looking like ours, much larger, of a mastodon. It was pretty cool out there on that island to find that. And so they were around, and people were finding them to forage. So then here comes along this sailor guy, right? And what was his name again? I forget. Captain George, right? Vancouver. And he's looking for, like everybody, economic gain, right? What's the shortest way? How can I find a passage that will take me there? And he checked every little nook and cranny like we all do, and that doesn't lead anywhere, that doesn't go anywhere. And he was deceived right down at Deception Pass, but came in off the straits here, 1792, looking for the Northwest Passage. But to his credit, he did some of the best cartography that had ever been done up till that time in mapping this beautiful area that we call home. Here's some of those early maps that he drew. And we're looking at the Gulf of Georgia, right? Now we kind of place it a little further north, Georgia Straits. But he had it right. Some pretty cool maps for the time period. And got confused, you know, we didn't have a crossing that you do in less than a minute on a highway until, 1935. Some have tried high dives off of this. How many of you kayak through here?
How
It's
many
fun.
walked underneath the bridge?
Huh?
Walked underneath
You
the
walk
bridge?
on water across?
No, underneath it.
I want to learn
I'm an
that.
island boy.
Oh yeah, nice. Happy to have you here. So, you know, you may probably already know this. This is why we're parked here tonight. But when we look at this zone right here and the Olympic Mountains blocking the Pineapple Express, now what do they call it? Oh, atmospheric river, right? We used to call it, you know, just a southwester and the Pineapple, and we've had various names. But if you go to Wenatchee Mountain, just off the map here, it's like 235 inches of rain on average. That's a lot of rain, but when you go from the Olympus down here to Squim area, and we're kind of in that northeast corner of this blue hole or the sucker hole, whatever you want to call it, the rain shadow. And look at it, it's down to, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. We're down to 16, 18 inches of rain from 200. And this is only in 26 miles. There's very few precipitation gradients that steep on the planet. And it's right here in our backyard. I set these things up so kind of you have some background to think about how you have adapted and the contextuality, you know, in terms of birds and mammals that also live here. So, you know, we've adapted and we continue to evolve. So there's some pretty good data. I'm looking at temperatures, cooling and heating degree days. But I think this is a significant one. Hey, here we are. This is us, right? You might see your boat in there somewhere. I don't see mine. Mine's small. But check out this. You don't have to believe it. I didn't create it. It's not fake as far as I know. But the ocean levels are going up, and I'm not sure how many of you have shoreline property, but I think living on a boat's a good idea. And now off the Straits of Juan de Fuca, coming from the ocean. My dad, he's definitely a landlubber in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He says, well, you know, the water that's right here where your boat is, he says, that's not from the ocean. That's not the real ocean, he says. I'm going, well, Dad, actually it is. Takes quite a while, though. You know, what do they say? A water molecule from the ocean might spend 6-7 years in the sound before it backs out to the ocean. So in a way, out kind of gray area, I might give them a little credit on that one. But it's interesting to look at how they've actually, and there's some pretty good information online you can find, how the movement patterns are and the upwelling and, you know, the tidal flux as we look at this waning moon up there and its influence on the tides. I mention this because when we look at trophic structures, which we're a part of here on this food pyramid, and we see that the sun, you know, is driving all this. Without it, we wouldn't have this pyramid of trophic levels or different stratas of organisms. But quite frankly, we wouldn't have had this meal probably tonight if it wasn't for phytoplankton, right? Utilizing the sunlight and producing through photosynthesis, you know, green energy for us that then are consumed. Whoops, didn't mean to do that either. I'm trying to hit the pointer, but zooplankton, right? Those that feed on that phytoplankton. In the Southern Ocean, when I work in Antarctica, we tell people that for all the humanity that's on the planet, there's actually more zooplankton, like krill, these little shrimp-like critters. Those were good shrimp, thank you very much, who brought those. But this animal that's, you know, the Euphausiid superpa is about 2 centimeters long. And it's really interesting. Some organisms, like you'll have the sun generating this phytoplankton bloom, the zooplankton will feed on it, and then you'll get big blue whales doing the massive gulp, bigger than yours, Steve, and taking a huge 10 tons of water, right? And then they push their tongues out, right? And if they targeted their radar pretty good there, they might have a ton of food in their mouth. Now, I could get into that eating style, right? For sure. So we're going to come in here where we have these small fish, etc. I think I'll switch to mine here, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. And but in this, no, it's not going to. But that first level of carnivorous consumers is kind of where we see basically the food for many of the marine birds. We're going to look at it. Can you believe it? He will get there in a moment. And just to complete this little background diatribe for you, that I like to, what you read up here is that we've got 30 species of small schooling fish, right, that are quite important to maintaining the oceans that are kind of at risk these days. So something to keep an eye on. The relationship, as we talked, in the lower strata there of the food perimeter, and then up here where we're target group, right, of marine birds or seabirds on the right. Any questions thus far? Did I lose anybody? That was my quick and dirty overview. It's probably been decades since you remember. Well, how many of you took biology class? All right, cool. So how much do you remember? All right, all good. So we're big on fish around here, and we like those good eating ones. But you know, there's so many people on the planet, we don't have enough wild salmon to go around. So we have to farm them, do we not? Which has its own challenges. If you want to go there, we can. And the thing of it is, I think we should all stay as generalists. If we're going to survive, we need to be adaptable in each moment, right? And we need to be generalists. Because there are those that specialize, such as our local Chinook-eating orca, right, or killer whales if you prefer. And I think we've had 2, if not 3, major record years of sockeye salmon coming back to the Fraser, even with climate change and warming waters, which is not so good for salmon eggs that like to be in cool, well-oxygenated waters. And the orca actually went like this. No. We couldn't possibly eat a sockeye. We're Chinook specialists. Can you believe it? So what do they do instead? Oh, we got so much energy, we'll just book on down to Southern California. We'll go way up to the Aleutians, looking. Where's the fish? So I say it's better to be more adaptable generalists. And take it from me, right? That's what I am, right? I've learned to be a specialized generalist. All right, we can talk about orcas. I have a whole nother program on those. Here's someone who has nothing better to do, right, than to do a DNA analysis and create a cladogram. Do you know this? So every one of those lines there is a clade of animals which seem to be similar and therefore are somehow related. So I just throw this up not to confuse you, so it's not the final exam, thank goodness. But Mac's Field Guide that's plasticized works really good. You can pick these up at the local bookstores, huh? And isn't it interesting, all the birds here, oh, not quite all of them, good, I saw a few exceptions. Historically, bird books always had all the birds facing to the right. Like none ever looked to the left. No, that's not kosher, always to the right. So this is quite useful, and actually I teach, if you were to take a class with me or go out on a field trip, I teach from a holistic method. And Roger Tory Peterson actually helped our World War II efforts because he was already with his first field guide out in 1936. And he did all the bird families, he had them in the front and back covers of the book in silhouette. And what this does, this is fantastic because in the lighting conditions we usually have, you don't see colors so well. You might not even get field marks, but if you can identify it by a silhouette and maybe how it moves and particularly how it sounds. You and I only see 2 degrees in perfect focus as far as visually, but our ears are working 360 all the time. I can be talking to any of you and hearing birds over here and telling you what they are if you want to know. Anyway. Just to say that we have opportunities. So and then what I like to do is go from silhouettes to some field marks, which again are quite useful and might be all that you get out of tonight. So, and then we can add the color layer. So the different birds that we might see associated with the marine environment. So a lot of ducks on the last one, and some auks we'll get into, quite a few shorebirds here, and some gulls. Oh dear, I love gulls. Well, you knew I was a little off to begin with. But if you want a good read, you know, bedtime reading, or when you're out on your next cruise and you're too lazy to walk on shore, get Nico Tingberger's book, The Herring Gull's World. He and his 50-some graduate students went around the world, and they identified something that might be useful, and maybe some of you even observed it, is that you have large gulls, medium, and small gulls. And when it comes to springtime like we're in, and the sun's arc, the photoporosity, is stimulating the pineal gland of the birds into singing, looking for a mate, building a nest, laying eggs, etc., all that, the sequences of the courting behavior is very similar in the large, medium, and small gulls, although it might vary a little bit. And it's very interesting. You can watch this as well. So we'd all like it when we delve into cormorants if these birds would keep their white rump feathers on year-round. It would make ID easy, right? But, of course, they go through a molt. They don't need those in the winter, and so they drop those. For extra credit, pay attention, and early dismissal, better yet. If you can name that cormorant, you're out of here, and I'll be with you.
Kevin.
Time's up. Pelagic, okay? So pelagic to me means ocean, right? Ocean going. And even though we might call gulls pelagic, they're not really. They actually usually visit freshwater daily to take a bath. So in marine, but not truly pelagic, spending all your life at sea, just for a little, you know, semantical differentiation. They have in breeding plumage this kind of iridescent blue-purple on their head and necks, which, you know, is just a little greenish. But this bird's only about 26 inches long, okay? And the double-crested we'll look at in a moment, and branch are about 33 inches. So there's a big size difference. This is a cliff nester, okay? And there it is, bingo, how about that? So finding a little, you know, nook there to lay their eggs. Now I'm a little bemused and bewildered, if you will, allow me as an aside. These birds' eggs look pretty whitish, don't they? And you know, I was reading in a bunch of the tomes I have up here you can look at before you leave, how they're usually more of a greenish or blue, which I don't get. So maybe that's something to do with the age of that particular image or something. But an open cup nest, much like the robin in your backyard, right, on this platform here. They're very defensive here. And here we see birds that are larger, and this is the double-crested cormorant. And I like them in silhouette. They have a bit of an attitude. Their beaks are always above the horizontal swimming. The upper mandible is slightly hooked for grabbing fish. And they actually partition out the water column. So the pelagic we just looked at first is down at the bottom, maybe, you know, say 50, 60 feet, picking through the rocks and pulling out crustaceans, maybe some small fish. And while double-cresteds can do that, they're more likely to be off the bottom substrate. And they're cruising along. They'll overnight out here on the islands that we all love on the cliffs, but then daily you'll see them going into Lake Padden and other freshwater bodies, particularly if there's quite a bit of food fish there for them. Here's one of my favorite ones, and I have many friends that will grin and have a twinkle in their eye when they start talking. So you see, these birds have a uropygial gland. This is the gland at the upper base of their tail, known to many of us as the Pope's nose, right, on a chicken. And so the waxy oil they get on their beak, and then they can weatherproof their feathers by smearing that all over. And you'll see them doing that. It behooves them. They have the best insulation on the planet for weight and volume, down, as long as they can keep it dry. And I could tell you stories about people wringing out their down sleeping bags up here at Hannigan Pass and ruining their beautiful bag. So this bird, after it's been busy diving for fish and everything, will come up and it will dry out its feathers. But I actually like to challenge that with some other hypotheses, which David Sibley says, oh, no, couldn't be. But maybe after you've been doing Olympic swimming, you should maybe thermoregulate, cool down, put your wings out. Also, you may or may not want to know this, but they've identified at least 13 different ectoparasites on birds. And so exposing their wings to the sun and wind might help remove those parasites, an attempt. like dust bathing, etc. So I wish I spoke Coromantese because I could ask the question, right? And you'll see them doing this. Strangely, you might see them during your boating seasons out here in some of these rocky islands, and they're the ones that will build the stick nests that start looking like chimneys, because they'll often mate for life and return. And while it looks great with the double crests blowing in the wind and they're looking lovingly at each other, the pair, and he's supposed to fly to shore and get another stick for the nest, but while she's not looking, he's grabbing at the base of the nest and presenting the next stick. Very energy efficient, I love it. If you see the cormorant's got a slight little flattened S to its neck, and you see a little orange at the base of the bill there, that's probably a double crested, okay? Okay, so far, are we doing all right? Yeah? Here, you need a question? No?
No,
Want to make a comment?
no.
Okay.
You're doing wonderful.
All right, excellent. So here's a comparison of wet and wet. I forget, pop quiz number 3. It just comes out, I don't know why. Who's who in this picture? If you've been paying attention. I love that big yawn right on cue. Like the smaller pelagic cormorant on the left and the double crested on the right, okay? Nice. And, ooh, this is a love picture here. And Valentine's is tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Aw, this is sweet. So if you're thinking about, maybe this is your old partner, maybe it's a new one, but you pick up some of that eelgrass growing out in these sandy bottom shallows out here, and then you kind of, cuddle up close. Think about it now. These are wild animals. And you don't get inside the circle, if you've ever done a wrestling, of another if you hope to, survive. You usually stay outside. You don't even look at your potential mate till you kind of get comfortable, right? Then you might get a little closer. And then, well, time's running out. We've got to get on with it. You pick up some, nice eelgrass and say, hey, baby. And go for it, yeah. And when they're up close, whoa, I mean, this is a look we all kind of, gravitate towards. I'd love to have a throat like that and eyes. So when it really gets hot, I was starting to say a moment ago, on some of these rocky substrates, they'll open up their beaks and you'll actually see what we call gular fluttering. It's organic AC, long before we even thought about it. Matter of fact, it was only 15, 18 years ago before designers here of our species started looking at animals that are in the Arctic, birds and mammals, and in the Antarctic, actually have their arterial and venal flow, the vessels, right next to each other. So the outgoing, your heart's beating, arterial flow is warming up the cooling return. And when you consider a bird that's standing on ice with bare feet, all you have to do is keep your foot that far from your heart, 1 degree, 2 degrees above freezing, and bingo, you've got it. People always ask me that when we're out on a adventure in the high Arctic, how is it that the animals laying on that ice, how come they don't freeze to death? And then I tell them this, and now you can tell them all, right? God, you're learning so much, and you should be taking notes. Well, at least written ones, because I can't trust with my mind anymore to remember all this. How many of you, when you're out there and there's a little bit of ripple on the surface, will see these small, compact, football-like shaped birds that look like this? Now, it's a whole different family. We've talked about cormorants. Now we're going into the Elcidae, the auks, which, another great early dismissal, extra credit question is, who all is in the auk family? So quiet in here. Am I talking to myself? Puffins, right? Okay. Rhinoceros auklets. Okay. Common murres, pigeon guillemots, those little white-winged things that we have down here at Dot Island or Chuckanut Island, nesting in the burrows. Oh, you guys are a great class, but it's going to be a long evening. All right, so both the male and the female have these beautiful, we might call this malar, this lower white one, the mustache, right? And then off the crest as well. And if you look carefully, eagle eyes in the back, you'll see a little fleshy, about 3/4 to an inch long, little horn, hence giving it its name, the rhinoceros auklet. Can you see it? But when you say auklet means tiny. But this bird's as big as any of those tufted puffins that you see out there. How many of you see puffins when you go up? Ooh, quite a few of you. Nice. I'd love to pick your brains on the history. I think they were more common here than they are now. So I like artists that kind of try to render what's going on. This is a very telling thing that you can do next time you're out on your boat. These birds are at the surface, but the next thing you'll see if they're hungry is they're going to tip up to the surface. Their primaries are going to go back kind of parallel with the surface, and then they're going to dive under. And this confused early naturalists and ornithologists for a long time in that they thought, what is this? It's smaller than a penguin, right? But it does the same thing. It flies under the water and catches fish. It must be a penguin. No, they're not even related. The Elsidae and the Sphenestidae, the penguins of the Southern Ocean, are not related at all. It's an example in nature. Now here's the keeners. How many of you consider yourself pretty keen? Remembering those biological lessons from your heyday, right? Of what we call convergent evolution. The similar, environmental pressures on the organism and how it responded to that stimulus actually created two winged, organisms a hemisphere apart doing similar things. And I suspect because you've all been successful in your careers, this is what I like, you're the resistant genes, you're still here. You're doing something well, and you have your whole career. And the neat thing to go out that door with is, I think, that we should celebrate the uniqueness of all of us and collaborate and celebrate that, huh? Don't you think? It's a beautiful thing. Don't focus this tool, this mind, on the negative, and we don't need to criticize. We need to collaborate and celebrate the things in common, huh? So here they are, just using a bird talk to, what a platform. And got you right there, right? These birds are so smart. A lot of folks outside this room, oh, stupid birds. I hate them, they make such a mess. Whoa! If a bird can go out and fly underneath the water, and have you seen it out there? Because of all the phytoplankton that's actually coming on right now as we speak, it's blooming. It's going to be pea soup out there. And it is hard. Have you done any diving or snorkeling around here? You should. It's hard to see very far. Now here's a bird that's trying to find the fish, fly fast enough, and snap its two mandibles together quick enough to catch. And it's not only caught one, pushed that fish up, with its cornified tongue, to hold it in its mouth, while it goes and catches another one. Another one. Try that sometime. Sometimes there'll be a dozen fish, and get this, if you thought that was pretty good, they know, just like all of you do, how to trim their vessel. They put half the heads approximately on one side and half on the other, so that, they're balanced out, stem to stern, right? Port to starboard. Whoa, I'm telling you guys, I was not even going to get any sleep tonight, just thinking about it. So, everyone wants part of this food show. And so if you're going to replicate your genetic material, how many have done that? And you want to be successful, because while these birds are fairly lived, the ducks that you see swimming around here, most of them only live 2 or 3 years. And if you don't really are not sexually mature until your second year, well, I'll tell you, your window is pretty brief. Better get on with it. But you got these gulls. I love gulls, right? That's a whole nother class. But they want to take that fish from you. So if you haven't noticed this even with our own kind, if you're coming back from Winchell's Donuts or wherever you've gone, right, don't be showing off your food. You're going to draw an audience. And indeed they do. And the slowest movement of this bird is going in and coming out of the burrow, isn't it? And it only began digging burrows in glacially deposited sediments where it could dig with its big beak and feet because of these gulls. Just like kingfishers, I don't think we'll get to that at the end of the picture, but maybe digging a 6, 8, 10-foot long burrow to avoid predation by gulls. Okay, so going in and feeding your chick, incubating your youngster down there. And so, as we know, going out the door first thing in the morning is the most dangerous first step. Don't you feel that way? No, you're all walking like this. I've written 2 or 3 poems about walking the watcher, right? I won't go there. But anyway, it can be dangerous. And so eagles, if you go to Protection Island, you all know where that is. You look up there, most of the population of the Salician Sea of rhinoceros auklets nest on Protection Island. And a friend of mine was a biologist there, Ulrich, and he was with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and he used to tell me, it was like, it's such an incredible scene. Back when, there was actually more of these tufted puffins there as well. You can tell that these 2 birds are probably a pair. okay, or they're good neighbors because they're within each other's, you know, wrestling circle, okay? And they have these big beaks, which are part of the attraction, these beautiful curls. I love the tufts there on them, and they're pretty comfy. Could you imagine? I mean, as I come back as a bird, I think this is one I would consider. I mean, that's got style, don't you think? But it's kind of a short bird, and actually, if you're going to rate them, you know, they won't be at the race course in their Maserati, let me tell you. Plump little bird, heavy. They're a heavy, plump bird, and they're carrying all those fish. And they have short, stubby wings. So if you're an ornithologist type, or maybe an engineer or whatever, you will look at the fact that they have small surface area and heavy wing loading. So they have to just beat those wings like a blur, right? And so they burn up a lot of energy going from A to B. But having a big beak, they can carry more fish. So most of these seabirds will nest on an island cliff or in a burrow, like we said, and then they'll fly out a great distance looking at where's the fish coming in from what direction. I think they'll go there and hunt. Whereas the birds that maybe nest on Chuckanon Island, Dot Island down here, have a short, simple little beak and only carry one fish. So they're very limited about how far they can go. Are you grasping all these concepts? No, you're in charge. It's the rheostrat's on. And so if it's TMI, just tell me, and I'll back it off a little bit. If you want more, should I talk slower? Because I can, you know. All right. Definitely, when you get social billing going on like this, and here's my favorite, you'll love this. How many of you like a massage? Oh, you're not going to admit it in public, but we do. And if you have a beak that does the preening or massage, how do you get to the back of your neck? It's impossible. It's nice to have a partner. This is kind of part of the deal, right? And the social bonding thing. So a little kissy-kissy, and then they do some preening. Oh, a little to the left. I got a bad knot there. Could you get that a little harder, please? Yeah, it's all good stuff. So you'll see in some of the reference material, here's an adult pigeon guillemot, right? Guillemot, if you like the French, in non-breeding plumage, or winter, some people call it. And here's an adult. You've all seen those, right? And how different they are. The juveniles will be looking a bit like this, you know, late after they've fledged out of the nest. But if you look closely, here's another pop quiz coming up. You were just dying for one, weren't you? I knew you were. Look at the color of the legs there. Can everyone see that? Oh, I gave it away, color. Do birds see color? Oh, I love it, love it. Well, I don't know, no one ever told me. Well, you know, in nature, we got really efficient organisms, and there's no wasted energy in nature. They wouldn't have color if they couldn't see it. Okay? So, you know, a lot of people, we didn't even know that some mammals, most don't see color, but some do. And it was only maybe 10, 15 years ago they found out that some fishes can see color, because we pretty much went like this. Oh, they can't see anything. And that's how it went. And you know what, probably 50% of your biological knowledge upstairs, I used to work as a consulting biologist, 50% is cultural mythos. Judgments by humanity, conjectures. And I'm happy when they let me take my owl class, you know, into the barn. But when they tell you, isn't it a beautiful Alaska snow owl? I've already, you know, told people before, just be nice. It's a barn owl, right? It's not an Alaska snow owl, a snowy owl. But anyway, we won't go there. So what you're seeing here is a pretty good example of showcasing your best look. This is passive advertising. Is this behavior right there? We all do it. You're all posturing, I'm posturing. It's good, huh? It's fun. And it's energy efficient. But these are heavy birds, like I said, so they might pitter-patter into the wind, run across the surface to get aloft. It's a lot of work to go flying. But look at here. Ooh, and I actually stunned the scientists just thinking outside the box. And you'll get this. See how this bird, it's flown out and foraged, and it's got a fish. It's coming back to the nest to feed a youngster, okay? Or its mate. If the eggs haven't hatched, it's feeding its mate, or it's feeding a nestling in the burrow. The important thing to watch, though, is that these birds are beating their wings like a blur, and they're coming along, and what they have to do, here's the nest burrow up here. They have to come in, and then they drop down, and they pitch up, and they have to time it perfectly to stall out and land right there on the ledge. How many of you could do this? No, seriously. And sometimes in high winds, they bash off the cliffs and they crash down and they have to come around and do it again. So I was on the marble murrelet team out in the Olympics, and we'll get there shortly. Oops, what happened? And I raised the question, and you'll appreciate this. Last time when you looked out the jet you were flying from A to B on, you were happy as you came into the runway, right? Landing, you were going pretty fast when the flaps came up. Because when you lose your forward momentum, and you've got your board, your industrial board out there in the sky, you could literally lose all the air molecules supporting your wing and fall out of the airstream. Okay, were it not for changing that. Birds have an alula, a thumb, right here at this carpal joint, the wrist joint, that controls about 5 or 6 feathers. The rest of these primaries, these helicopter blades, about 9 or 10, are controlled by 2 digits, okay, like that. So this bird, is pretty amazing to be able to do that without an alula. And I just stunned them just like this. I said about marble murrelets, because people are saying, well, why do they fly a circle around the old growth trees? And they're going to nest there, I know, but then they make this jet sound, and they're going, here, like this, right? And then they fly down, and why do they do that? I just calmly said, because they don't have an alula. Who's he? Who invited him? It was pretty good. So we've already seen the young pigeon guillemot. So here's this very bird, a marble murrelet, a tiny little bird. Have you seen them out there before? You'll hear this, keer, on the water, especially going forward here. Pretty soon they'll be courting. What we haven't talked about is many of these marine birds are using what we call counter shade camouflage. Are you familiar with that? So ventrally, underneath, they're very whitish. And seen from their prey's perspective from down low against the sky dome, it's hard to see a white-bottomed bird, isn't it? And the inverse isn't true. They're dark-backed, which is really great against the dark water as predator camouflage, like eagles or peregrine falcons that might nab them. Okay, so think about that. And they got their name, right, for being marbled during the breeding or alternate plumage. See that brown coloration? And it's probably uttering one of the keynotes right now as we speak, talking to its buddies. They like to dive down and fly their wings after candlefish, capelin, small herring. They only capture one bird or one fish at a time. One, that's a lot of work. And what's interesting is while most of these marine birds nest very close on cliffs or islands to their foraging substrate, this bird, and we don't know historically, the indigenous peoples told us about marble murrelets. They had a different name, of course. Even up our own Nooksack River Valley in 1927, a logger with his big chainsaw cut a big tree down in the summertime, came crashing down, and some baby birds popped out. Ooh, what's that? Right? With a big wad of chew in there. And, oh, that's a marble murrelet. But biologists, no, we couldn't believe the indigenous people or a logger. So they go along, no one accepted those as records. So we didn't really know until like 1994, a biologist found a nest in a tree. And while we had ancient forest here nearby, this bird was about 35 miles inland. And the record is about 52 miles inland. That's a long ways to fly with one fish. I don't know about you, but incredible, huh? So here this artist showed both the basic or winter plumage as well as the breeding plumage. How are we doing there? Okay? A little bit more? All right. And here's what's happening. So this little whir bird, right, the marble murrelet adult, flying with this fish in its beak, and some like to have the head right, some like to have it left. I'd love to find more out about that. And this youngster has been sitting there waiting on a minimum 4-inch wide branch, and often much bigger, ancient forest. They don't build a nest, it's a depression in the epiphytical or aerial mosses and material, and that's what's happening. And the youngster's going to be food begging, if you haven't seen that. And the adult, and they'll walk together, and the youngster will swallow. About 4 gulps, it's gone. And the adult goes, oh goody, get to fly 52 miles. If you want to see this, go down to Kayak Point in the summer. And I see adult marble murrelets foraging there. Then they come up to the surface, and they have a fish in their beak. And they're not eating it, and they're watching for gulls. So I know that pretty soon they're going to fly inland to the nest, okay? So here we have that youngster, and without adult guidance during the evening, we think they're flying back out to the ocean. They find their own way, which is pretty incredible. I don't think I could have found my way back to Kalamazoo, Michigan. Hey, first question, drum roll.
How many times a day they make the trip?
Oh, very good question. About 4 to 6 trips that we can witness during diurnal or daytime hours.
Wow.
I don't think they make them at night, but you know, a high caloric return, and good thing the adults are finding plenty of food, or they couldn't power that flight, could they? Any other questions while we have a pause? Do you need to kind of rotate in your seats, you know, stretch? Does anyone need? I don't have too much more time. I'm sure he'll cut me off, so let me keep going here.
You have 10 more minutes, what do you think?
Okay. What? How long do I have?
10 minutes?
Okay, 10 minutes more. Can you handle it?
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
It's really getting hot up there. Are you? I see some ice back there on some of your noses, but for many people, the yodeling call of the loon is kind of considered synonymous with wilderness, and it's a beautiful thing. And we call them common loons, but guess what? In the 80s, 80 lakes were surveyed when I was with the Department of Fish and Wildlife looking for nesting common loons, which build out of floating vegetation, a little raft. They're very secretive. This is a bird that can't stand up for more than about a second and a half. Its feet are postured so far back on its body, it falls down, right? It falls down. So usually they're going to nest pretty close to the water's edge. But there was only 3 nests found of 80 nests surveyed. And then we surveyed on western Washington, 45 lakes, and there was only 2 nests found. So their commonality in this state is not that high. Maybe some of you came from the Midwest. Minnesota is probably the highest nesting success of loons in the 48 lower states. But they do winter here, and I'll show you a couple of images. Another example of a very ornate countershade camouflage possibility here. But here is what they're looking like. I just had 2 field trips out for Audubon here on Saturday and Sunday, and you can go up to Simiamu or elsewhere and see this large bird. I didn't mention that cormorants use those saturated feathers as ballast for their diving. And these birds, by our humble and infinite wisdom, we think that because they have solid bones, they're not very highly evolved. But when you think about what they do with those bones, right, as for ballast, they can actually, they'll routinely go as shallow as necessary, but they can get down there all the way up to 400 feet, which is some pretty deep diving when you think about it. And again, visibility is low. How do they do that physiologically? When we think about the orcas we saw earlier, lowering their metabolic rates, right, and very efficient. So pretty impressive, the adaptations that they have for catching fish primarily. They'll take other things, looks like a small crustacean here. And there's this bird, looks like a juvenile, right? And with juvenile birds in general across the board, there's probably exceptions, but usually for camouflage purposes, the distal or outer edges of all these contour feathers we're seeing here, coming out in tracks or lines of feathering, are usually going to be off tones to help camouflage them better. And then they go into, of course, this adult plumage, which should be coming on pretty soon. That's a pretty good sized fish there. But they have to position it very carefully. Oh, I've been kind of lax, haven't I? Pop quiz number 5, or is it 6? Why does the bird reposition the fish so that it's head first going down the throat? Pardon? Could be barbs on the stony door, but it could also be the opercula. Ah, the gill covers. He hadn't thought about that one, but he's ready for next one, aren't you? All right, very good. And after you've incubated precocially this youngster, this egg, for about a month, right, then you don't want to get to your 401k snitch, do you? So hop on back, a little hitchhiker, and I'll take you around. And it's so cute. Grebes will do this as well. So I love seeing the baby loons there. This is Gavia immer, right, is the Latin for the genus species name. But look at that massive beak. I like hanging around with loon pictures because it makes mine look smaller. I am not endorsing this book over any others. I have most all of them, but you really need about 5 or 6 field guides to get much information. But really, they're limited by the context that there's 850 breeding birds in North America. So how much can you say about each one? But I like Sibley, who this is, David Sibley, because he shows us some important information which most don't. Looking at well, okay, they're in this plumage, but for how long? August through February they can be, right? Adult non-breeding, September to March, etc. He shows us the wings up and the wings down. No other field guide does that. I was in Colombia birding when COVID broke out. I was only going to be there for 32 days. I ended up being there for 6.5 months. Yeah, and I had the Birders app. Oh, I'm going to slam technology for a moment. Pardon me, I'm old school. And so the app didn't have any wings up or wings down. It only had the birds, copying Americans, right, looking to the right. It had vocalizations, which most, things don't have. I can't hear this book tell me what they sound like. It'll describe it, which is kind of fun with different languages of the world. But anyway, so I like this style of approach. As we go, and you're out there, if you've taken, dragging your feet, getting your boat buffed out, I could come and help you with that. We'll get your boat ready to fly. And in April, we'll start hearing not just common loons coming up the coast. And you'll hear them maybe if you have the windows open in your house and you're close to the water. They'll be flying over and they'll be singing or calling as they're flying over. Common loons, Pacific loons, red-throated loons, all of them. It's really beautiful. Now, if you're all with me and you haven't fallen asleep yet, look at here, very subtle. Yellow-billed loon, same size as the common loon. This is a rare tick. Now think carefully. Do you want 500 birders in your backyard coming within the next couple of days? Probably not. They'll be looking for water, use the bathroom, want some food. So I'd keep it to myself, like your best fishing hole, right? So then we see this is then the Pacific loon here. A little different look you can see than the common or the yellow-billed. I like this. So they're doing essentially like you. You're all probably ready to do this. You've been perching for so long. Good time to get standing up, right? Stretch those wings a little bit. And yeah, catch those fish. Fly on north soon, and they will. They'll go up to the high Arctic looking like this. So they're a ground nester, again, usually adjacent to water, but they're quite vulnerable. Arctic foxes, skuas, a lot of predators up there, and you get to see it all firsthand as I have there. It's impressive. I call this kind of inverse periscoping. So, looking around, where are the fish, right? And then diving down after them, a Pacific loon adult there. Watch for this. Hey, you know what I did when the mycologists, we hadn't had it for 4 years, but the mushroom group here locally had their big mushroom show in the fall last October up at Western at the Viking Union. I just went in there with my camera, and there was a world expert talking on edible mushrooms, and I just clicked them all of them. He said I could. I asked him. Just to show you the difference between those 3 larger loons here on the bottom, and then this next one we're going to look at the red-throated loon. So just kind of like a green-winged teal, these guys can hop up off the water surface in 1 or 2 leaps and be off. Beautiful bird looking like this during the alternate or breeding plumage. Yep. Lovely, and they have quite the eerie call on the high Arctic too. I love listening to them. Oh, and this maybe is where is this a good time to wind down? I mean, I can keep going, as you know. How are we doing, everybody?
What do you guys think?
Good. Hey, so when we get offshore and we're in a little deeper water, I've seen them down at Larrabee Park. If you go down towards the Swinomish Channel, coming into what is that bay? Padilla Bay, right? Before you get out to Hat Island, there's that deeper dredge channel there. And you can look for this. This is a high Arctic breeder, but it winters right here with you and I. In the old days, is that a question or a comment?
Yeah, I was just wondering, some of these photography is really good.
Yeah, and some of it's even mine, but most of it isn't. But I have to tell you, you better be on your sharp edge if you're looking. Like, I'm putting together a program, right? I've got people from 18 different countries, so I better get it right. They're going to be right on it. It'll be in the evaluations if it's not. And when you're looking online for imagery in Google or whatever, you sometimes on less common birds, you might only get 2 or 3 images that are correctly named. And then they'll show you, have you run into this? You know, a lot of heads nodding up and down, a lot of stuff that is not anywhere near, okay? So thanks. So this bird is actually, of all of them that you've learned, taking careful notes, yeah, mentally, you're gonna be laying in your bed like this tonight. What was that? What did he say? That this bird actually invests a lot in its look. And that is interesting because I don't think they encounter that many progenitors of their species in the high Arctic. It's a wide open place. Have you ever been there? There's not one tree, 360 degrees, no trees. And the permafrost, right? I can't go into Denali National Park to the end of the road now. Why? Because a rock glacier has wiped out in 1921, or 2021, excuse me, the road. Rock glacier, what's that? That's rocks embedded in permafrost, but now the temperature has risen 2 degrees, and so the rocks during the summertime, this is really interesting, driving the road. Yeah, they're going down slope, right? And interestingly enough, at the peak, they had 0.65 inches per hour. The road was moving down the slope, right? So all very interesting. So you see these birds up in the high Arctic. The males on the left, we used to call them old squaw. It's not PC. Now we call them long-tailed ducks. One of my first long play records, I remember listening. I love this voice they have. And the females in the back. And the point is that while most birds only molt their feathers twice a year, and ducks are no exception, how many of you, another take home, you've got to get this down. All of the waterfowl, swans, geese, ducks, etc., will go into a molt that leaves them flightless. Now, your keys have all been collected and you can't drive away from this lecture. You're going to have to walk, right? And the food is pretty well cleaned up. So what are we going to do, right? So these males, okay, that are, while the females are still tending to the youngsters, they all park it together close to a bunch of food and hopefully in the thick brush to avoid predators. And they'll go through this whole replacement of their flight feathers because they could only run away from you right now. So all the birds that you know of, swans, geese, and ducks, go through this eclipse plumage, it's called. This bird does one more. They'll actually do 4 major molts and 3 on their head. But we have to temper that with this. The white on birds, the distal end of those heads on the cranium, right, actually wears off, exposing the brown basal area that we see right in this zone. So all that you see that's white will wear back. And I just think that in the next life when I'm a bird, right, I think this will be so good. Imagine the energy of changing clothes. I was in my handyman clothes, then I had to change into these clothes. I'm going to have to change again when I go home. All the energy, and what do I put on? And I don't know. And just have it wear, from one season to the next. Wouldn't that be great? I think that's how we should do it. So you can actually see these long-tailed ducks out here if you go looking for them. And they'll be pretty obvious. You might start seeing some sky pointing. The male will turn his head up, all show, right? And he's uttering certain googly-gaggly sounds, which I don't want to try to imitate. And here he is. Here's the male up in the Arctic. This is what he looks like. What a different animal than what we see here. You see that? Okay, so pretty cool. Keep your minds open when you're going out there. Just look at the form, function, listen to the calls. You'll figure it out. All right. Fantastico, huh?
Those are not the ones in the marina here, right?
Huh? No.
Okay.
We're going to have a separate breakout session on this. Birding 101. And you can help teach me, right? We'll help him out, right? He's probably referring to what's in the marina right now that has a lot of white on it. Some of the males, have white circle on there. Or an Adidas stripe. Very good. 1, 2, 3, all together. Golden Andres. Yes. All right.
But those are not ducks, right?
Yes, they are.
Golden eyes are
So
ducks.
they're a diving duck. Okay, we got dabblers tipping up, right? Kind of, treading water in place. And here's another thing for you to take home. Dabbling ducks like mallards can only reach this deep down into the water column. That's the food they can access. A Canada goose, right, can go this far. A trumpeter swan can go that far. See how they partition out the foraging strata right there, the water column? It's really neat how they've all learned to coexist. Shall we continue? Up to you.
What do you guys think?
5 minutes? 7? Hey, let's reach a consensus, because I don't want anyone to get, bed sores sitting for too long, Or if you're not having fun and you want to go home, that's fine. 5 minutes?
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Okay, I promise, okay? I'm punching it in. Here we go. So we've talked a little bit about loons, we got some grebes, and that's what I'm going to talk about. This is the one that I always like to empower you. With your phones, right, you can take pictures of anything you want. And guess what? I used to chasing Merlin falcons, right, for my study on this small raptor that hadn't been done before. I used to cross from Coopville to Port Townsend and back and forth all the time. If you look in my Write in the Rain notebooks from Steve's over here, Applied Digital, whatever he calls himself now, Write in the Rain notebooks with my old mechanical pencil. And I take this in the Grinnell system, record all these notes. And amazingly, I run into Dr. Bonnie Stout, and she's written the species account, 30 pages for her PhD on red-necked grebes. And she said, David, that is such a valuable data point. And I should have said, how valuable? But I didn't, right? Because I had recorded during April, like 14th, let's guesstimate. And she said, oh, they're staging. All those magnetic grebes were staging there before they flew nonstop up to the Mackenzie River, where she would have her little tiny car helicoptered across the river, so then she could spend all summer recording data about the breeding habitat or habits of this animal. So any one of you can be that science, and I believe where you live, you probably know your area and the wildlife that's there far better than any biologist from the office down there or whatever. Seriously. So I think if you care, and that's why we're here tonight, I don't want to preach to the choir about, the beautiful connection with nature, take note, huh? So here we are, a fish predator. This is the largest of our grebes. Did you know, for extra credit again, that this was the place in North America to see western grebes? This is the place you came in the winter, 20 to 30,000 out in Bellingham Bay. Where are they now? No one knows, no one asked the question, and no one pursued it. Why? Because no arms got twisted. That's why I like the Sea Doc Society out of UC Davis out here perched on Orcas Island. They get funding from people like us who care and go out and ask these questions. They're working on our orca whales, they're working on others. But none of the government agencies ever pursued this. And we had some ornithologists of note here in Bellingham that had the data too. So I'm just saying, you are a valuable asset to your community. So this is a fun group here because they'll do social vocalizations called duetting, which means you would do the first note and I would be the second one. And this was first studied in tropical jungle scenarios because to keep in contact with your partner or even the flock, you would utter certain notes. And it's thought that it evolved to actually become the song of the pair. They're doing duetting. And when I was down at the south end of Patagonia, kayaking down there, almost into the Southern Ocean, I was able to hear oyster catchers, you all know those, Magellanics down there, and I couldn't believe my ears. I'm in my feathercraft paddling underneath the calving faces of these glaciers. I was taking pictures of ashy-headed geese, and I heard Magellanic penguins were duetting. So cool. So look at this. This is the beginnings of their nest here. And look at, what a cute kid, huh? Woo! Zebra stripes. Wow, I'll get some jammies like those, huh? Very cool. Just like the loon we saw. So a little exercising here. That's the youngster a little later on as it ages. Almost a fledgling. Hey, now I bet you I could sell these. These are very red hot items just before Christmas, huh? Nice little cozy, cushy young. And so, yeah, different grebes that we have out here, such as westerns, showing us some neutral markings there on the collar of the neck. Here we have some that won't look like this yet. Now, they're going to be nesting on freshwater ponds, horned grebes and eared grebes that we see here. Another fish eater, more basic plumage here. Pretty good sized fish for that bird, huh? But I'm very intrigued by the eye color of the loons and the grebes and why red eyes service them well, and what, how does that behave subsurface? Different raptors, eagles, and hawks, etc. also have eye color change as they age, and what's the function of that? How does it work? Beautiful breeding plumage horned grebe here. There's that floating nest we saw in loons as well. But this is, I didn't show you this on others. The cormorants have 4 toes forward, and they're webbed in between. That's toady palmate. Your robin in your backyard has 3 toes forward and 1 back, called ansiodactylic. How many of you like woodpeckers? Ooh, they have 2 toes up and 2 toes down, zygodactylic, huh? So look at how this, you all, if your engine's not working, have to drag out the oars or the paddles, right? Look at how beautifully, if you want to really, help your designs, the lower leg there, the tarsus, is flattened laterally. So when it moves, forward and back, it has the least drag or resistance. You see that? And then these feet now, flared out like this, are really the perfect paddles. And I can guarantee you, if you put that in the water or the wind tunnel, the way the water moves and flows around that is probably no better perfect design that you could find out there. I always like art and people's different expressions of grebes on the nest, so this is quite loving here. And who knows, you might see a very pale one called a leucistic one, so just stick to your guns. Elroy, David taught me to be holistic, and I can see that the outline, the beak, the trophic structures, and yes, it's catching fish, it must be a grebe. Even though it's white, it's not in your book, just trust your intuition, okay? It can be leucistic, very pale. It can be melanistic, very dark. The melanin saturation following Loger's rule, or they can be albinistic, totally or impartial. Pied-billed grebe is one that you might find right here in the marina. Maybe you've seen them. Pied is actually an old English term referring to the black and white. And Brits have many birds, not many, but quite a few in their bird books that are, quote, pied. And with that big yawn, I think that we should... Thank you very much.